Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 24th of March, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined live Skype link by David Scott, giving us his report from north of the border with northern exposure. Weather, well, it's looking a bit gloomy for the weekend, so the sunshine has disappeared from Plymouth, and at the moment it's grey, cold and raining. Few reports across the country of rain, but I think it's dry and grey in Perth, where David is. So the weather sums up the political climate, Mike.
Well, the image looks very bright, but I don't think anything's too bright for anybody on the receiving end of British human rights. But here we have the Foreign and Commonwealth Office putting itself up for re-election to the UN Human Rights Council. I am proud to present the United Kingdom for re-election to the UN Human Rights Council for the term January 2017 to December 2019, says Baroness Ainley. Well, there you go. Let's have a look and see what they're up to. Apparently, the UK brings engagement across the whole human rights spectrum. It says there, the UK has taken a leading role in UN fora on combating child, early and forced marriage, preventing sexual violence and conflict, combating modern slavery, and protecting freedom of religion and belief. Well, we'll see if they do. But commitment to Human Rights Council mandate and support for the civil society, Brian. So let's have a look at some of this. The UK pledges to work to promote open societies. Is that in the sense of George Soros, I ask?
Absolutely, George Soros and policy.
Yes, and challenge threats to civil society. And they say that they're going to help states through transition. I don't know how Britain feels in a position to help states through transition. Perhaps that's by starting wars, starting colour revolutions, this kind of thing. By supporting stability and reform efforts on the ground. So everything they say seems to be reversed based on recent history.
It's very interesting, this language, Mike, because it's exactly that, totally reversed. So, of course, if we look at Libya, if we look at Syria, if we look at Afghanistan or Iraq, utter mayhem on the ground as a result of the British getting involved to assist with human rights. Actually, we won't say British, the British government, because I think it's fair to say that 99.9% of the people in Britain would not want such a policy unleashed.
Indeed. They are going to encourage a fast international response to severe human rights violations and abuses, even when they don't exist, of course, as in Syria, including support of conflict prevention. And here we go. They're going to stand up for religion and belief. The thing that got me about this page, Brian, was the image. The upstretched hands and so on, and the sun in the background, because we see this everywhere. Here we've got future leaders represented by this image. We've got children's charities represented by it. We've got citizenship, both in the United States and the United Kingdom. We've got open society represented by it. And this image, everywhere that we see it, is sort of representing organizations that are working for the common purpose with a small c and a small p.
This is true. The image is of worship, isn't it? The upstretched arms are worship of a higher deity. This is what you're seeing. And we're seeing two things happen here. This is bringing into the political agenda the transformation into the new communitarian one world system of government. And of course, what has to come hand in hand with that is the one world system of religion. So I think these images are very, very significant because they show that there's this hive agenda coming in. But Mike, can I say that I find it obscene to see the British government talking about human rights in these documents. I've just spent an hour and a half this morning with Carol Woods, who is the very brave whistleblower, talking about the doctoring of children's records by Lancashire County Council so that children could essentially be stolen to order. She spent an hour and a half with me describing her experiences of being incarcerated in psychiatric institutions in Britain in order to silence her. So this is the British system under Tony Blair, Gordon Brown or David Cameron. False arrest, false imprisonment, and the use of the psychiatric system to silence people who dare to speak out about the government. And then David Cameron goes overseas and says, well, we need to remove this head of state because clearly they can't run their government. The hypocrisy, and it's very callous, is obscene. Perhaps we should bring David in at this point just to see what he feels. David, I'm almost lost for words because the British government has been out of control for many years, but what we're seeing coming in now is extremely dangerous.
Yes, I mean, it is out of control hypocrisy, that's for sure. And almost everything that was said there rings entirely hollow. Slavery, we're against slavery. Well, we're not against debt slavery. We're not against taxation slavery. We're not against making people slaves to the state. We're only against certain forms of slavery. And we're going to redefine slavery as freedom, and freedom is slavery. Freedom of religion, the illustration you showed there, that would be sun worship, which is obviously paganism, and they're not being upfront about the fact that that's now what they mean by freedom of religion. One thing that's not meant by freedom of religion is, of course, anything to do with what you would term traditional Christian values. They are being constantly seen as being problematic, as being in conflict with the state, and being illiberal or too judgmental. And then you have, can I believe that this British government is crowing about protecting children? Really? I would love to see that start.
Indeed. Well, one country that's recently been on the receiving end of British human rights, of course, is Yemen, because we have been supplying Saudi Arabia with most of the weapons that have been used to kill 6,000 plus people in Yemen in the last few months. Now, the United Nations this morning has announced a ceasefire, which is going to begin on April the 10th, and apparently peace talks beginning on April the 18th. So we'll wait to see what comes out of that. But in the meantime, there is a campaign started, Tweet for Yemen, because we are now at the 1 year point, or we're approaching the 1 year point. So this begins at 1 minute past midnight in Sana'a on Saturday morning, which is 9:01 in the evening on Friday evening in the UK. And the idea is just to tweet as much as possible about Yemen in the 24-hour period, which is on the anniversary of the beginning of that war. Remember, this is another case that is not a civil war. This is Saudi Arabia and its so-called coalition partners that are dropping bombs mainly on civilians, and it needs to be stopped. So here's a little bit about it. March the 26th will mark 1 year of the Saudi-led bombing and blockade on Yemen, resulting in the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Thousands killed, tens of thousands injured, and millions displaced in urgent need of food, water, and medicine. Please help us raise awareness of Yemen's catastrophic situation by breaking the silence. We'll begin on March the 26th at just after midnight Sana'a time, and we'll tweet for 24 hours. The specific hashtag will be released a few minutes before we begin, and we invite you to prepare your own tweets beforehand or modify existing ones during the event. We also encourage you to retweet tweets with the hashtag and hopefully gain a wider audience. This is something that does need to be brought more into the forefront of the public mind.
There's little appearing in the mainstream press reports. You get the odd snippet, but it's almost as though they don't want us to know it's going on. And interesting, the Saudi involvement. I think I'm right in saying that the foreign minister, Mr. Hammond, has got his underwear in a little bit of a tangle because he thinks it's outrageous that a judge should rule that a Saudi diplomat should be stripped of diplomatic immunity in order to be called into a divorce hearing. So we're now seeing the British government not really working for anything to do with the British people, but there's a problem with the Saudis, then in steps Mr. Hammond. Well, we're just going to put in an advert here for really the interview that we did yesterday with Dave Barmby. Just extraordinary amount of information from Mr. Barmby about how the previous referendum, the previous vote, which took us into the European Economic Community, how that was rigged back in 1971 through to 1973. He'd done a tremendous amount of work. He has produced a book, The EU, a Corporatist Racket, and not only can you get that book through the UK column if you visit our shop, but if you also go onto the website and look for the featured videos, you'll see the interview that we did yesterday. And I have to say that it was interesting, wasn't it? Because the interview is long because there is just so much evidence to show propaganda, the European movement getting into schools, interfering with school children, the use of public money to run pro-EEC, as it was then, campaigns. Quite a long interview, but well worth watching. Once you've watched the interview, I'm sure that you'll want to get hold of the book, which has got all of the documentary evidence in it, showing that the British public was deceived back in 1972. And what is happening in 2016, Mike, a psyop over the European referendum.
Absolutely the same thing again, yes. Right, let's move on. Harvey Procter, it's amazing how many column inches Harvey Procter is getting at the moment. Cops wanted to tear my family apart and force me out of my rural community. 2 articles in The Sun today. I rebuilt my reputation after Rent Boy scandal in the 80s. Now Nick's lies have destroyed me. It's almost like he's proud of what he did in the 1980s. But the comment I really wanted to make about this is this reminds me absolutely of Max Mosley and his willingness to sort of brazen it out in the public gaze. And of course, the whole Max Mosley thing led to the attempted shutdown of the press in this country. And I'm just going to watch this with interest to see whether the same type of operation whether this is going to be used for the same type of operation, because the people that were behind the campaign to get control of the press are still working pretty hard at that.
Well, let's name the names. It's Leveson. It was Common Purpose. It's
David Bell.
It's David Bell. It's a cabal that worked so hard to get control of the press. They didn't do it, and Harvey Procter is now the man to set standards.
Apparently, yes.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, where does that lead us? It leads us into the subject of child abuse. And, of course, we've had a conviction in Nottingham. This is the man, Andrew Loggins. He's had a 20-year sentence for carrying out historical sex attacks. I've put an image over the man's face there from the Nottingham Post. Because basically the whole thing, I think, is being quietly swept under the carpet by what people say. You'll see the significance of that in a minute. But basically, note the nudge here, a catalogue of historical sex attacks at a Nottingham care home, Beechwood. It's all in the past, Mike. The man did it back in the 80s. Nothing's happened since, nothing to look at. It's all been solved. And of course, Nottingham County Council is particularly going to solve the problem by paying out roughly £10,000 compensation for all the youngsters who've had their complete lives destroyed by this sort of person. David, can I just get a bit of comment from you on that, please?
Yes, we have the ongoing inquiry both in England, the Goddard inquiry, and in Scotland, the O'Brien inquiry. Neither of these are making much headway. We're not seeing any sunlight coming into this particular world. There's a constant refrain that it's historical, that it's something we have to tidy up from our past, because the past has a very bad reputation. But now we are just about perfect as a country and as a state, and there's nothing bad happening anymore. So there's no urgency, and there's no need for investigation, and there's no need for things like local newspapers in places like Nottingham to be asking hard questions of those currently in power. No, it's all in the past. There's nothing to see here. That's the refrain. It's not true. and we need to keep on these people to get as much truth out into the public domain as possible.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And of course, the police are so fundamental in this. We've got the extraordinary situation at the moment where children are literally being taken by order. We put in an order for a child, you get the child, that earns you money, or you've got a plaything to do as you wish with. The police are covering this up. Well, of course, it's not going to be too long before the police themselves are going to lose their own children to this system. So if you know a policeman or woman and they're a good person, talk to them about what's actually going on, because if the police don't do their jobs, of course their children are going to be as vulnerable as anybody else is. Let's come back to Nottingham, and this is the sort of thing that's going on in Nottingham County Council. Worksop Guardian here. Notts County Council has named a new corporate director for children, families and cultural services. So it's corporate. This is about profit, Mike, isn't it? Is it my imagination?
No, I think you're right.
It's corporate. So we're not really there to protect children. We are mixing cultural stuff with protecting children. What's happening? Well, those children are being abused. And here's the council leader. This was the quote that I decided to put over the face of Mr. Longest, the convicted paedophile. Here's the gentleman. He says, on behalf of this council, I welcome this lengthy custodial sentence for a man who blatantly betrayed his position of trust with vulnerable children. I applaud the victims in this case for their bravery, courage and persistence in helping to bring Loggins to justice. Is he talking about Melanie Shaw, that his council hounded, bullied, assaulted, denied medication, allowed to be put in prison, bullied in prison? Is this man talking about Melanie Shaw? Is this man living his own reality, Mike? I'm getting a bit passionate about here. Let's continue the rest of it. The outcome in this case is proof that victims will be listened to and believed. There won't be any real justice. They're going to listen to them. The abuse of children in any era is totally unacceptable. I pledged last November to make an unreserved apology to victims if this council was found to have failed to protect children in its care. Tomorrow, at a meeting of our full council, I will fulfil that promise. And this is the man who is actually leading a council that is paying victims who have suffered unbelievable abuse, their whole lives ruined. And this man apparently thinks a payment of £10,000 covers up that abuse or makes up for that abuse. It's outrageous. David, I'll hand it back to you. I am almost speechless today because this stuff is so vile.
This should be a resignation matter. What he said there was extremely interesting. He applauded the persistence of the victims. Why, if the victims are being listened to and believed, is there any need for persistence? You wouldn't need persistence. You would just need to tell the truth. The reason there's persistence, the reason he had to applaud the persistence, is the victims were ignored for years and threatened for years, and the council acted against them in ways large and small, vindictive and mean, for years. And that's why he's going to have to go in front of the full council and give an apology. But that apology is not going to involve full disclosure because, well, the insurance companies wouldn't allow that. That apology is not going to involve naming all the perpetrators within the council who he is now admitting let the survivors and victims down, because then he would have to sack people and presumably some people would be convicted and investigated by the police. And we're not going to have any of that because that gets away from the other thing he's trying to suggest, that it's one bad apple. It's not one bad apple.
David, thank you for that. Let's add to that by just taking a little look at Notts County Council Twitter page, little video clip here. What is important to the council? Is it those children? Well, no. Here's the headline. It's all to do with recycling. We'll just follow it through. We've got recycling. We've got mention of the full council meeting. It's a little bit slow, but stay with it. You need to register your vehicle. This is quite a big one. They're worried about the temperatures dropping, freezing road conditions. Citizens' advice, of course, they're only there to help people, so there's the wagon out. And here we are, we're going to advertise how good we are at failing to protect children. This is the normal scam of these councils, boasting that they're doing something which they're absolutely not. So they're backing Abused Child Day, that seems appropriate. Cycling's important. Not sure what this is, nothing important, of course. And as you'll see, we're big on gritters. One more I'm waiting to come up because what they're heading towards is adoption of children. Here's the leader. He's not talking about children. He's talking about the budget, the gritting lorries. And somewhere at the end, we will see that we're talking about adoption. Here we are. We're supporting Big Adoption Day. So children, as we've heard from Carol Woods yesterday and today, saying that children's records altered to enable them to be able to take these children, and away you go. And we'll just bring in this one very quickly. So there was video, old pictures and video of the abuse at Beechwood Children's Home. What did the council do within weeks of the abuse coming to light? Well, they got the contracts out to get the home demolished. And of course, Melanie Shaw and others have maintained from the outset that children were murdered on site. They have maintained that children were pushed out of first floor windows and died, and they have maintained that the police have failed to carry out full and proper forensic investigations into those deaths. Well, here's the man with ultimate responsibility. It's David Cameron. He's very worried. He needs a little bit of extra money into the Conservative Party, and he's talking about a Greater Britain. He needs your money, Mike, to build a Greater Britain. And we'd just like to point out to people that the term One Nation and a Greater Britain, this is the crypto terminology for his One World corporate racket. So we'd like to encourage you to donate if you're interested in sleaze, lies and deceit, unlawful wars, the covering up of child abuse, waste of public money, treason or misprision of treason. Clearly you need to donate to the Tory party. So don't delay, donate today and help promote the Tory corporate racket. I will be getting my checkbook out after the programme. And we better just bring this in because Guido Fawkes has pointed out that the Tory associations are absolutely not happy that David Cameron's now trying to cut them, and they are fighting back and saying, no, you're not going to give us simply pro-EU candidates. Mike, there is a dictatorship coming into place.
There absolutely is. It's already here. And far be it from me to defend the BBC, but in this case, I'm afraid I have to. This was a live broadcast yesterday, I believe, from the House of Parliament. And Norman Smith had just been introduced to give some comment on something, I'm not sure what. But there was a demonstration going on behind him, and it was a demonstration to do with cuts to disabled services and so on. And he literally had got the first half dozen words out when this lady, if that's what she is, came over and basically said, you can't speak here. You can't talk on the TV now. You've got to stop this broadcast immediately. And he said, why do we have to stop this broadcast? And he said, because the terms and conditions of you being here say that you're not allowed to broadcast here whenever there's a demonstration going on. So basically, because there was a demonstration going on, the Parliament staff felt that it was best to censor that demonstration and make sure it didn't appear on live British television.
So the government now simply coming out and censoring the BBC along with everybody else. Dictatorship.
Indeed. Okay, David, we're going to start with Donald Trump. I actually left the first two graphics that you wanted to include. I didn't include those because basically the same point that's being made here. Trump obviously getting the support of Alex Jones at the moment, but I thought Salon's headline was pretty incredible.
Yes. Yes, not one of Alex's biggest fans, I suspect. The point I wanted to raise here is Trump is getting support from unusual areas, and I think it's worth just looking at what this means and what sort of president he might make, and why some people who have a great deal of credibility in either alternative news, such as Alex Jones, or in alternative economic views, such as Mark Faber, are actually saying, well, given what we've got to choose from, Trump is in fact the best of a bad lot. In Alex Jones' case, he's actually wholeheartedly supporting him. And I think this is interesting and surprising. Now, I've raised issues with Donald Trump before and quoted quite extensively Jeffrey Tucker, who is a libertarian writer from the States, who has raised the alarm very early on the Trump presidential bid, and has raised the issue that what Trumpism is a right-wing form of totalitarianism. It's a right-wing socialism or fascism. And he's pointed out elements in the Trump philosophy which are mercantilists. They're building trade barriers, and they're looking for essentially living space, the Lebensraum philosophy that marked out German nationalism. And he's raising this as an area of grave concern. And despite this, you're having people like Alex Jones supporting him, and a lot of other people across America supporting him. So I wonder, Mike, if you have a view as to why that might be.
No, I don't particularly. But you also mentioned Mark Faber here.
Yes, Mark Faber, who's a very is an investor and commentator on economic matters, and he runs a blog called Gloom, Boom and Doom, right, which is an economics blog, and it's very good. And he speaks with a great deal of intelligence on matters relating to the economy. Now, he sums up this. He says, given the alternatives, I would vote for Mr. Trump because he may only destroy the US economy, but Hillary Clinton will destroy the whole world. Look at her nation building in the Middle East. How successful has that been? Now, that's a very good point. So we're seeing here a wise and prudent investor like Mark Faber saying, well, if it's a choice between these two, he sees Hillary as the bigger risk. You've got Jeffrey Tucker who's saying, well, I spent my last 20 years arguing against the establishment. I think Donald Trump is such a risk. I hope the establishment head him off. So these are the choices that we've been presented with. We have options of various forms of potential catastrophe, and we're being asked to pick the least catastrophic. It's a poor choice that's been offered to the American people.
I mean, one of the comments that is so often mentioned is that Trump is discussing subjects that others won't discuss, and most of his popularity has come about as a result of that. But what you're suggesting is that there's something else going on there as well.
Yes, one of the things that Jeffrey Tucker raises is what he describes as the Trump dog whistle. That Trump says things that only certain people hear. So when he makes a comment about Mexicans about a wall, he's speaking to a particular right-wing, probably xenophobic constituency in the United States, and they hear what he says, right? And it says to them, I'm on your side. I understand the world. I see the world as you do. But the rest of society doesn't hear what he's actually saying, doesn't interpret the words in that way. Hence the idea of a dog whistle, which dogs can hear and you can't. is quite a good one. And there's quite a lot of cases where Donald Trump will use this dog whistle approach. And unless you're tuned into the concerns of the constituency that he's talking to, then you don't understand what's happening. Now, he said a few things, and some of his advisors have said a few things that Alex Jones has picked up. And Alex Jones is now convinced that Donald Trump is going to audit the Fed, and he's going to start to roll back the overweening state. He's going to be essentially Ron Paul. And I really don't think he's Ron Paul. He's not, right? And I think Alex Jones has been taken in by this. And again, it's these statements that are being thrown out to attract support. People in America, as here, but particularly in America, are so desperate for anyone who's authentic, anyone who's not compromised, anyone who's not bought and paid for, that someone like Donald Trump comes along, says a few of the right things, and he's getting support from all sorts of places where you wouldn't anticipate support rising. He's getting support from people you would think would be more cautious. But such is the yearning to have someone actually running government who's not operating against the people's interests, that they're very willing to believe what Trump is trying to sell.
Even if he's selling Israel?
Even if he's selling Israel. Now, this was quite interesting. He went along to AIPAC, and he did the entirely formalistic, and this seems to be a rite of passage for anyone who wants political office in America. You go to AIPAC, you make a speech, and you say, I support Israel, I support the right of the Jewish people, the only democracy in the Middle East, to have their state, and I'm behind Israel, we're shoulder to shoulder, we'll back them, we'll never back off. All of these types of statements to steady applause. And that's what it was. He did say, and I've since discovered all the other Republican candidates have said that they're going to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I think that's hugely significant. In international affairs, that's a red rag to a bull. From 1947-48 until the present day, every major country who has an embassy in Israel has it in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is so sensitive politically. It's the most sensitive real estate on the planet Earth, and because it's claimed by more than one country, no one puts an embassy there because you'll start international disputes. You will start diplomatic squabbles, and you could even start a war just by doing this. So now the whole of the Republican Party, including Donald Trump, is committed to move their embassy. And again, no one seems to be thinking through the consequences. Really quite a worrying and rash view, because no one's explaining why they're doing this in any broader context. It's just, this will get support, this will be a dog whistle item for the Jewish community in America. This will get me support, therefore I'm going forward with this. There doesn't seem to be any thought or analysis underlying it. Very worrying.
But Trump wants to make America great again.
Yes, I saw this little thing on Twitter. I love this. I think it's always good to keep a sense of humour when we're looking at these people who tell us that they have the right to rule us and the ability and wisdom to do so. So yes, make America great again.
Okay, a bombshell. Is this Lockerbie?
Well, yes, this is a bombshell. Now, this came to light just after we came off air last Friday, and it is to do with Frank Mulholland and the Scottish Crown Office. Now, what they have got here is a call by various campaigners in Scotland who are looking for reopening of the Lockerbie investigation, who think that McGrahy was wrongly convicted, and not just that, but the elements within the Scottish Crown Office and Scottish Police have been criminally involved in falsifying evidence and perverting the course of justice. And they were claiming that Frank Mulholland had a conflict of interest, could not preside over this investigation, and must resign. Now, that was 4 days ago. is when they said that.
Right,
And
and this article says Scotland's most senior state prosecutor may lose his post after allegations he acted with criminal intent during the trial of Lockerbie bomber. Lord Advocate of Scotland Frank Mulholland, the country's most senior state prosecutor, will be deemed unfit to hold office if he does not pass a report into alleged criminality involving his office's personnel to an independent prosecutor. Spokesman for a justice campaign group considering the case told Sputnik on Wednesday. After a 3-year criminal investigation, Police Scotland are now set to pass a report to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Office, Scotland's prosecution service. It follows allegations that senior prosecutors, police officers and prosecution witnesses acted with criminal intent during the trial of Libyan Megrahi, who was convicted of the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. The claims against the prosecutor's office include perversion of the course of justice and perjury. That says it all, really, doesn't it?
Is it possible to have a bigger story in the Scottish legal system? It's actually been quite quiet in the mainstream press. It wasn't really reported very widely. But what that's saying is the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service and Police Scotland perverted the course of justice and perjured themselves over the mass murder, the biggest ever mass murder in Scotland. That, I think, really qualifies as news.
And the Herald here saying that the petition is going to be kept open, is it, or?
Well, this is an old one. Just to give it a little bit of background, this is an older one from 2014 that shows the campaign has been going on for some time and has been getting some political support, where people like Dr. Jim Swire and others who are campaigning for genuine justice in the Lockerbie case are saying, no, we don't believe that this man has been correctly convicted. We need a full, proper, transparent inquiry. We need to get to the bottom of this.
It's not just Mulholland, it's also the police being accused of sort of holding back.
Yes, and the police have been accused. Police Scotland under House was accused of dragging its heels over this investigation. So the investigation's gone forward with the less than enthusiastic support from high-ranking police officers, but they have got to a point where they're now ready to put in a report to the Procurator Fiscal. That goes to the Crown Office, currently under Frank Mulholland.
But it's not, is it? Because he seems to have just stepped down, is that correct?
It's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so he would have to decide whether or not to prosecute people. He's getting pressure to say that actually he's got a conflict of interest. And then 5 days after that, he announces his resignation. All of a sudden, without any warning, no one saw this coming. Frank Mulholland announced that after the next Scottish elections, which are just on May the 5th, they're only just over a month away, he'll be gone.
But it's okay because he has Nippy's support.
Yes, we had the automatic expression of thanks from Nippy here. Frank Mulholland has been an outstanding Lord Advocate. He has my thanks and admiration for his services to Scotland. Now, Bin Lorry crash, Holly Gregg case, there's a whole litany of things before you even get to Lockerbie, where Frank Mulholland, like his predecessor Dame Elise Angiolini, who came from a similar background, has been a disaster for the Scottish justice system. And the person in the number 2 spot comes from a similar insider background within the Crown Office, a career prosecutor.
Right, so this is the Lockerbie case, and we're talking about Leslie Thompson. And
Leslie Thompson,
and they're
yes.
saying that, like Frank Mulholland, he was appointed from within the ranks of the Crown Office staffers.
Yes. Now, this has only happened 3 times, basically, in the history of Scotland. Frank Mulholland, it would be 3 if Leslie Thompson gets the job. Frank Mulholland was the second one. Dame Elise Angiolini was the first. And, of course, leading QCs said of her time in office that she caused our ancient system of criminal justice to go to hell in a handcart. So we very much hope we see a different sort of person in that very key post, because it's required that they operate with the best interest of justice and the best interest of the Scottish people in mind, and as a restraining hand upon the Crown Office, not operating as an overzealous prosecutor or a political placeman.
Well, just to end on this subject, just want to draw people's attention to this article written by Tony Shell on the UK column, actually just over two years ago now. Almagrahi, Lockerbie, and the lies that we've been told. So do have a read about that. I think probably all the usual suspects are mentioned in that particular article, if I remember correctly. But if anybody hasn't seen that yet, please have a look. Let's move on to no to name person. A little demonstration here in Arbroath.
This was the action day. They had a meeting in Arbroath, as we described last week. Following that, there's always an action day to encourage people to sign a petition. So this was the people out on the streets asking people to sign up, handing out leaflets and asking them to sign the petition against the scheme. And all week we've had revelations about the nature of the scheme, the cost of the scheme, and we've had several examples of Nicola Sturgeon and others trying to defend the scheme. And I'd have to say it's going very badly for those who think that every child in Scotland needs a state guardian. Here's a headline here that looks at the cost. Costing the public 61 million is for starters. The fiction is this is a revenue neutral scheme once it's established. So we'll be able to monitor every child and, where necessary, every associated adult in Scotland, gather all this information, share this information, and it will be revenue neutral, if you believe that. Now we have, if we go on here to the actually quite difficult to find minister responsible. This is Aileen Campbell. She earned that nickname when she memorably said that parents also have a role in bringing up their children. Aileen Campbell is probably coming in for quite a lot of flack. There's an awful lot of flack. The people of Scotland's anger is growing over this. She's the minister responsible, and she's very, very quiet. She's not saying much. Her head doesn't pop above the parapet very often on this. And I thought it'd be interesting for everyone to see just what sort of background she has and what sort of qualifications you need in order to change the relationship between the state and the family in Scotland. She studied politics and history at the University of Glasgow and then was national convener for the SNP Youth Wing. Since graduating, she worked as an editor of a construction magazine, Keystone, and editorial assistant on a short-lived pro-independence newspaper, The Scottish Standard. Before her election to Parliament, she also worked for Nicola Sturgeon as a research assistant and for Shona Robertson and Stuart Hosey. So she is basically someone who's gone to university, majored in student politics on the SNP wing, and then worked as a researcher for the party, and has never had, really, a proper job or any life experience on which to base these fanciful and dangerous schemes that she's busy imposing on the whole of the generally much wiser people of Scotland.
Now, as you said, some people are supporting this, so we're seeing the case for the named person scheme, but it looks like perhaps Nicola Sturgeon herself, what is this? It's okay for everybody, but I won't be involved in it myself, or what is really her attitude here?
If we could just nip back briefly to this case for the named person scheme, there's a couple of things here I'd just like to bring out. This was written by Mike Burns, who's head of Children's Services, Glasgow City Council. And it was written in a kind of a somewhat academic journal, and it was titled My Argument in Support of the Named Person Scheme. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs to give you an idea why he actually supports it, because it's very revealing. He says, quote, "Getting it right for every child is about getting childhood right. It's about our culture and our capacity for compassion. It's about our willingness to nurture, our attachment to all citizens, and our commitment to restorative approaches that will help tackle some of Scotland's deep-rooted social problems, with an emphasis on the word deep." I'll leave you to speculate on what that actually means. We all need to parent better, and we all need to nurture better. Helping each other is about us. It is about the collective. He continues, Will Hutton in his most recent Social Work Scotland conference highlighted that we need to challenge the current narrative which presents individualism as superior to the collective. In truth, it is tough and challenging to parent on your own. I respect and to some extent understand the deep human instinct to nurture our children close to us, But that does not mean that we need to bring up our children without help. Indeed, we need to develop and nurture our young people so that they can engage with the world. The curriculum for the curriculum for excellence underlines the attributes that are required from our young people to prosper in a modern society. Who is going to do that if not us working collectively? So it's all about the collective. It is essentially a communist, communitarian approach to take over, on behalf of the state, the family, to destroy individualism, which they clearly view as being bad, and to say, no, you can't have the ultimate choice on how you bring up your children, because that choice lies with the collective. And the collective is, in fact, in practice, the government, our wise overlords. It's an assault on liberty, the like of which I really didn't think I'd ever see in Scotland.
David, really interesting analysis, and what an important subject this is. I've just been looking at the chat box while the programme's gone over the last 10 minutes or so, people saying, well, they can see after the forthcoming referendum, if we are indeed to be locked into the European Union, that political parties are going to disappear, the electorate is going to disappear. And of course, it completely fits this agenda that the state will take utter control of our children. And we might call it communist, communitarian is probably the correct description. But of course, that system itself is corporatist. It makes profit from the children. And as we are seeing time and time again, the system itself is criminal. We have paedophiles clearly at work within the child protection system, and we have government ministers, if they're not involved in the abuse of children themselves, they're certainly covering up the abuse of children. So this is a criminal communitarian system, in my opinion.
Criminal, certainly, and you have to remember when you're talking about profit, if you're talking about the free market, you're talking about choice. If you're talking about the state, you're talking about the threat of violence and force. The free market is very good at providing goods where there's a choice, because where does the discipline come? The discipline comes if any company abuses its position, all the customers go elsewhere. I'm not going to be treated like that. I'll go down to the next man and he'll treat me properly. That's where the discipline comes. If you combine that with state coercion, then you get fascism. You get a very dangerous system indeed. Just to briefly close off on the named person, Nicola Sturgeon was interviewed, a very powder puff interview by the BBC, and was asked, because hundreds of people had contacted the BBC to ask them to raise the question of named person. So they did, and Nicola Sturgeon said, well, it's not compulsory. You don't have to engage if you don't want to. There's nothing compulsory. It's, don't worry. Unless it's a matter of child protection, there's nothing compulsory. Now, this has been pulled apart in both in Parliament and on social media, and shown to be entirely misleading. And she repeated these misleading statements in Parliament. So that's been playing very, very strongly in the press, on social media, and actually on the floor of the Parliament during the past week, and is going very badly, because it isn't an option. What Nicola said was, if the named person comes to you with advice, you don't have to take the advice, and it's therefore optional. You cannot avoid there being a named person. You cannot avoid that named person gathering information on your child. You cannot stop that. It is not compulsory. It is not optional. It is compulsory. The named person will then decide what to do. They will decide, not the parent. And they will use compulsion in that decision making if they see fit. And if you do not agree with that as a parent, then you will be viewed as a further risk factor. That's a further risk indicator. And these things will mount and mount and mount until they become a child protection concern, because a number of these low-level well-being issues, gut feel something might not be quite right, well-being issues, taken together can be a welfare concern. And then you're into child protection, then you're into social services, then you're into the threat of losing your children. It's all one big joined-up process. and it's not optional, it is entirely compulsory. It's extending the sort of power that the state has misused in the child protection realm for so long into every aspect of family life.
David, we're just about out of time, but I just wanted to bring this one in because on the other side, this is from the other side of the Atlantic, of course, we have to break through this idea that kids belong to their parents. So just a very quick comment on this one.
Well, ultimately, a lot of these ideas that we're seeing in Scotland came from the other side of the Atlantic. They came from the World Bank, they came from UNESCO, and they came from American communitarian thought in the left-wing liberal aspect of American society. And this is, you see it acting in America. We must get away from this idea that your children are yours. They actually belong to everybody, which in practice means they belong to the state.
Okay, well, David, thank you very much for that excellent summary, particularly on the aspect of the children. We'll just end by saying, if you haven't heard it yet, do listen to the audio interview organised by Andy Peacher and Freedom Talk Radio, where former social worker Carol Woods is describing criminal activity within the social work system that leads to her being incarcerated into psychiatric units to silence her. This is the reality of Britain in 2016 under David Cameron's Conservative government. We are moving into a dictatorship very quickly. Can we stop it? The answer is yes. Exposure is the weapon. If you're not doing it already, people need to be out talking, not to others that already know, but to the people who don't know what's happening. Don't be put off if you're rejected. Move on to the next person. But if we don't stop this agenda, then the next step is the camps. And of course, it doesn't matter what colour you are, you will still be an invitee of the camps. It doesn't matter what religion you are. So there's a great need for people to stick together. And perhaps we'll end on that note on Easter weekend. Look after your family, friends and neighbours, and look after the stranger, because you may need that person in the future. Thanks for joining us.
So we're not here tomorrow, and we're not here on Monday, so we would be back on Tuesday the 28th, we believe.
We had a debate over that. We think it's 29th, we're being told from Scotland. Yeah, best if you know what day it is, but the time is passing very quickly. So it's effectively a long weekend for the UK column. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your support in 2016. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.